Hey everyone, this is Nick from LEO Combatives. You're listening to the Mega Talks podcast.
Remember, you guys, you can follow the Mega Talks podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Also, don't forget to subscribe to iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and several more outlets where you can listen and enjoy the Mega Talks podcast. I release a podcast every Monday called Mini Talks. This week, I'm going to be talking about a little history about the lane markings on highways.
Hey, what's up? This is John, guitarist, founder of Dark from day one. Be sure to tune in to my friend Chris and Mega Talks podcast and keep doing what you're doing. Much love. Peace out.
So I was doing some research on rules of the road and the laws, and come across some history about lane markings. And lane markings were kind of a little fascination I had was as a kid. You know, I could see those things as he's driving down the road, trying to figure out what they mean, and just you kind of learn how the highway and the roads are laid out when you pay attention to the lane markings, and they're put there for safety. To have some sort of structure to keep people safe. And the history goes back as late as the 18th century. Like right-hand travel was made a law in 1792 for the United States. And I think there's another country. I can't remember which country. And it wasn't until 1835 that the British adopted left side travel. And the left side travel was pretty much adopted. Some of the foundations there were just based on self-defense. When you were on the back of a horse, most people carried their sword in their right hand. So if traffic passed them on the right, they were able to defend themselves easier. Here in the U.S., the reasons were much different. Large agricultural wagons, they were usually, being pulled by several horses. And the person that was driving the wagon would control these horses from the horse that was in the rear on the left-hand side. So as far as visibility, it was much more practical for traffic to pass them on the left. Therefore, they adopted the right-hand travel. And when we talk about the lane markings, there were, this came up to budgets and how much people had, how much money different states or different cities had to put on the road, but it became a safety thing because it was kind of a free-for-all on the roads. People would meet people on a narrow road head on, and this was out there after the invention of cars come along. People would meet each other, and they would have to decide which way they were going to pass. And I can't remember the name of the guy, but he saw a milk truck that was leaking milk onto the road, and he got the idea of painting a white line onto the road. And I won't get into the details of, when the cars were invented, when highways were invented, pavement and all that. Just a little tidbit for you. The reason they made a lot of these cars black from the factory is because black paint dried real quick. And if they used any other paint, it would slow down production times. So all cars were produced in the black color. So that's your little tidbit on cars. I don't quite remember the year, but Michigan takes the credit for the origination of lane markings as far as like making it a law to adopt and use lane markings on the highways. There were several states began to adopt a law of using lane markings, and I believe Oregon was one of the last. Connecticut was one of the first states in 1901 to come up with speed limits, and their speed limits was 12 miles per hour in the city and 15 miles per hour in rural areas. Later, and not just Connecticut, but later, in 1927, there were signs and markers became a regulation on the highway. Now, during this evolution, there was white lines separating the highways, and it became that they started using a dashed line instead of a solid line, but they were all white markings on the highway. And one of the reasons they went to the broken lines is because it's actually saved money in some of these places, because there was some of these states and some of these cities, people complained and they wanted, highway markings on curves so they could, and see how to drive. And some of these people actually went out on the roads and painted the markers themselves, so things could be safer. In 1978, we had it was made a regulation that the dash lines on the highway had to be 10 feet long with 30 feet gaps in between each one. So while you're traveling down the road, you can kind of get a feel of, each line that you pass, you're traveling, 40 feet in the distance. It wasn't until 1971 that the yellow center lines became a law. So it hadn't been that long ago since we had yellow lines on the highway, where they switched from using our combined white lines and yellow lines on the highway. And I took a defensive driving class through Thompson's defensive driving school, or Thompson's driving school. They still hold some classes today. And they taught a lot of reasonings about how to read the road and what the lane markings actually meant. And, just structure the road to keep yourself safe and to put yourself in the right spot while you're traveling. And one of the things about the way they use dash lines today, basically it means a passing zone. You can, when there's a dash line next to you, it gives you permission to switch lanes or pass. Now, when you get solid lines, that's a restriction. And it usually means that the two types of lanes are restricted to travel in that lane only. Now, to discuss like white lines, like if you drive on the interstate, when you come up into the on-ramp, you see a white line to your right. It's common you see a white line to your right and a yellow line to the left. Now, when you make your entry or your merge onto the interstate, you'll see a thick white line. And that thick white line usually symbolizes merging traffic. Usually it symbolizes, can be a congestion or a caution of traffic. You're not supposed to cross over a solid white line. You're not actually supposed to switch lanes until you get to the broken lines, and then you're allowed to merge over into the other lane as long as your speed is up to where it needs to be. Sometimes, let's take the UK for example. Have you seen highways over there? Right before an intersection, they have a squiggly white line. It's zigzag from side to side. That kind of signifies, an intersection's coming up when you see that in the road. Now, you can read American roads in a similar type of way when you see the solid white lines, or you can see the thicker white lines. You see the turn lanes, and you see the white lines are to your left, the white lines are to your right when you get into the turn lane, and to your left, you'll see a double yellow line, which double yellow line, you're not supposed to cross over. It signifies the oncoming traffic. Not a solid white line to your right means you're not supposed to be crossing back over into that lane, as you see some people, they commonly do. So now we get into same rules as for the yellow lines, and it's similar, but in some cases it's just total madness. If you travel the roads, you know what I mean. And when you see a solid yellow line, obviously that means you're close to oncoming traffic. You're not supposed to cross over that solid yellow line. If it's a broken yellow line that's immediately to your left, that means you have the option to pass. Now, where this is gets into different types of rules, and this varies from state to state. You have the crossover lane, or oftenly call the idiot lane. Some people call it the emergency lane. It's for different uses in different states. I know when it first came about, I seen in California, it was kind of like an emergency lane. They had a dash line, but it was more a double dash line. If you're here in Arkansas, it's common that you see the solid yellow line and with a broken yellow line on the inside. And it used to be that lane was specifically to turn left out of. Now, when you enter this lane, you can enter that lane at any time that you want. You don't have to wait until you're 100 feet, 10 feet off the intersection or ready to make your turn. You enter that lane anytime. As long as you turn left out of that lane, you can pretty much drive in that lane. There's no regulation that I know of now that tells you can only travel for 400 or 500 feet in that lane. You just are mandated to turn left out of the lane. Now, that lane, when they call it the idiot lane, you had a lot of people that would pull out into traffic and pull into that lane and stand in that lane. And what I mean by stand is they're trying to merge. People will make a left-hand turn out onto the roadway and stand in that lane and wait for their opportunity to merge into regular traffic, which that used to be an issue and it used to be prohibited. But lately, they've said you can pull out into that lane and you can merge into traffic using that lane. Now you can move. You don't have to stand in that lane and wait for your opportunity. You can merge. You can bring your speed up and merge. But when you meet other cars in that lane, whoever occupies that lane first pretty much has what they call an intimate domain, which means they occupy that space and they're given the right of way. Even if you think you should be able to pull out and beat them, they have the right of way to be there over the car that's turning left into the lane. So you really have to watch and make sure that you're not meeting anybody else there. There are many ways to control the traffic. We got the reflectors on the highways. We got sign markings on the highways, traffic lights. But lane markings is just one of them. And it's pretty interesting to just watch the evolution and wonder where to go from here. And I believe at one point they did have black lines on the highway. You will see black lines on the highway today, but they're pretty much, they outline the yellow line or they'll outline the white line to make them a little bit more visible to drivers as they travel. So when you're out driving, pay attention to your lane markings and try and stay out the car next to you, because a lot of the crashes that are out there that people are getting hurt on or because of simple things like people not giving signals or people cutting people off. People are tailgating. People are in a rush to get different places. Speed is also a factor, but these other ones, falling too close, those types of things leads to a high number of accidents where people are getting hurt and people are just aren't watching the directions that they're traveling in, and distracted driving may have a little bit to do with that. It also goes back to the skill of the driver. So when you're out there traveling on the road, look around you, recognize some of the lane markings. Maybe from listening to this, you have a better idea of what's going on and how to read the highway in front of you to help you travel. If you have any comments on anything or anything to add, just add it to the post. Add it to the post below. Shoot me a DM and we'll talk about it. But I got another podcast coming out this week. Make sure you're listening, and I'll catch you next time on another episode of Mini Talks.